let me start by trying to warm up your seats a little bit and ask a few questions. How many people in the room have obtained a California teaching credential? They have a California teaching credential in their possession. Wonderful. Of those people, how many went through the CSU, California State University system, to get that license? Sizable amount. For those of you working with new teachers, do you have contact with a lot of California State University graduates, people who've been teaching for a few years, who may be in your district, at your school site? I'm hoping that you do, and I suspect that you do. What I want to talk about today is a tremendous opportunity that we see at the Cal State system. And I'm speaking for San Jose State, but I think I can take a risk and say that I'm speaking in the spirit of people who work in the Cal State system. Common Core gives us an opportunity to do some things we've already been doing and leverage some things that we would like to see go even further. And I want to sort of talk about that. But I also want to show you some examples of what it looks like to work with novices. It's critical to remember in all of this policy work that we are talking about a next generation pipeline of teachers. We're always talking about who's in the system and supporting those who are the mentors, the cooperating teachers, those who are going to help to bring about a realization of, for a lot of us, what the dream is of a better system of accountability. But we also have plenty of people coming through the teacher pipeline who are trying to figure out whether they want to stay in this profession, whether they want to be a part of it, and what do they see as an incentive for being in California schools. I think formative assessment is a huge carrot and a very important place to remind ourselves that one reason you still want to be a teacher is because you get to work with kids, and when you work with kids, you get to know them. And formative assessment is really a way, I think, into a relationship with our students. Becoming a formative assessor is really about translating policy into practice. And from the perspective of San Jose State, that means digging into what we do and figuring out where we can have touch points with this work. We're one of the largest and most diverse public teacher education programs in California. We support multi and single subject candidates, those people who want to obtain a Tier 1 credential in California. But my focus is going to be more on how we support those who are going to middle schools and high schools in California and trying to figure out whether they can make a difference in the lives of the children they teach. We're lucky at San Jose State because we have actually coursework dedicated and focused on formative assessment. And that's not typical of all the programs across our great state. There's lots of courses, there's lots of standards, there's lots of reasons why we need to teach what we teach in our pre-service programs. Formative assessment and a course dedicated directly to that particular curriculum, unfortunately, is not as widespread as I like to see. But at San Jose State, we've been innovating a course, and we have a space for it. We are committed, like many CSUs, to deeper clinical practice. What we really focus on is getting our student teachers both in our class at the university and then directly into the classrooms themselves, and having them have lots of opportunities to actually explore what it means to become a teacher and therefore what it means to become a formative assessor. So clinical practice forms a very big part of training up on formative assessment. And of course, we're all working under the conditions of licensure. So we have to make sure that anything we're doing with formative assessment, any hopes and dreams we have for it, aligns with, for example, the performance assessment of the California teacher, which is the Tier 1 licensure examination system that we use at San Jose State. Working with 8 subject areas and all the nuances that go to that, it's amazing. It's, talk about a work in progress. We don't just work with ELA candidates, and we don't just work with STEM candidates. We work with physical education teachers, and with music teachers, and with foreign language teachers, and with social science teachers. we are, in some sense, trying to figure out what formative assessment looks like for all the subject areas, but also going back to the core principles, which have been so eloquently discussed by this panel. So it's a balancing act between sort of the content preparation and the more general principles that drive this work. The good news for us is that the time is now. The Common Core framework says it all. And I've just pulled out some of the key elements of that framework. I'm sure you've seen it, you've read either the entire document or some part of it. But what I'm highlighting, what amazed me about this document, was that speaking and listening, effective communication, the use of general academic or domain-specific words and phrases, the language strands of how we think about teaching and learning are now popping up. They are now visible to us. And so we have this tremendous opportunity to start to think about what formative assessment looks like in the classroom, in part because now we're going to actually be paying attention to speaking and listening. But before we do any of this, there are 4 basic myths. And I haven't yet researched these myths. I'm not an anthropologist. I'm not a student of religious philosophy. But I do think it's worth calling them myths for now. The one myth is that talk is cheap. There's so many people out there who are teaching and people who observe them, administrators, who might think that we have more important things to do in the classroom, talking about this paradigm shift in thinking. Some people believe that one is born a great teacher or a great facilitator of classroom discussions. They're just those people who do it well, and so we ought to just find them, put them in a classroom, and we'll be fine. Another myth is that leading rich discussions is for Socrates only. When you talk about discussion, immediately they go to Socratic, and then they think, oh, you're talking about what you do in a language arts class or a social science class. And then I think the most devastating myth is that kid talk is not worth listening to. I mean, that frankly, what kids have to say is not interesting. That's a very pervasive belief. Our research shows that a combination of those beliefs and sort of being a novice or beginner teacher tends to direct you towards teaching in ways that are not exactly what I think Margaret or others would say is best formative assessment practice. Beginners tend to pose closed-ended questions that are looking for a right or wrong answer, and they're searching for those answers in the classroom. Luckily for them, they'll find at least 2 or 3 kids in a class of 37 who will raise their hand and provide that answer. And they generally are very excited by the eager beavers, and they rely on those eager beavers to help drive their lessons forward through the 55-minute period. Very often what we notice in our novices is that they really haven't gotten curious about student thinking, so they tend to ignore it and or not look at ways to elicit it. And that's not their fault. They're beginners. They're learning to ride a bicycle. They're trying to figure out, as Linda Darden Hammond said, how to speak. They've got a lot to learn, and that's what's exciting about working with them. To help them move forward and become more expert, we're trying to lay out a common language that synthesizes the work that started back, as we know, with Sadler, and certainly has gone up through Black and Willem, Richard Stiggins, Margaret Heritage, Dylan Willem, need to say his name again. Lots of people have spoken to what it means to be an effective formative assessor. We think that these moves are the critical things that our student teachers can focus on. But we've taken the sort of general findings about preparing the groundwork or creating a culture, thinking about an effective range of questions, giving students adequate wait time, asking follow-up questions that deepen student understanding, sampling a variety of responses, representing variation, seeing patterns. All of that needs to be brought into a language that our beginners can work with, understand, and utilize. So we're trying out at San Jose State a moves-driven approach. And I know it's impossible to see what's in those little honeycomb spaces, but basically trust me, it's a language. Binning, probing, pausing, tagging, It's a language that's active, and we're finding that our beginning teachers, within a couple of weeks of instruction, sitting both in our university classroom and then going out in the field and working with their own students, are actually able to report back to us very quickly. I posed today a question, but I didn't probe. I was able to tag what students were thinking and put it on the board, but I couldn't figure out an effective transition to what I actually wanted to teach. I got lost in all the excitement. But they're using the language which then we can all agree upon is a way to start to share out and give feedback to one another. So I think it's critical that when we look at the formative assessment literature, we don't get caught up in the checklisting phenomenon. It's this, it's this, it's this, it's not this, it's not this, it's not this. Of course, that's the starting point for all of us. But the next step is to think about a quilt work of composite of moves that are like a dance that you're trying to weave together in a lesson, and you're reflecting on it. You're planning for it, you're reflecting on it, and it's giving you an opportunity to look at your pedagogical practice. Critical part of all this is thinking of it as a route, a journey. This is not something you do overnight, you're not born with it. So we like to think about it as almost a learning progression for teachers. You know, we talk about student learning progressions. Well, maybe we should start talking more and more about teacher learning progressions in the domain of formative assessment. Sometimes you're only there for weeks, for months. It can take years to get to the top. But the point is, you are making progress. So, formative assessment, it's an art and a science. And since we're out here selling books today, I found out, I'm going to sell somebody's magazine, not mine, in using assessments thoughtfully. I wrote an article this spring outlining a little bit more what I mean about the 7 formative assessment moves. I think the key point for me in writing that article is to think through with my students at San Jose State, how can we get started with this wonderfully rich, complex task that we call formative assessment. Let me quickly show you a video of the 7th day.
And here it is. So, let me pose this to you. A cup of 0°C ice water stands in the sun on a hot day. Predict what will happen during the first minute. So, either A, the ice will begin to melt, B, the water will increase in temperature, or C, both of the above. So take a minute to think about that. And the way I want you guys to respond to this question is to answer by standing in different places in the room. So if you think it's only A, I want you guys to get up and stand over on that side. If you guys think it's only B, I want you guys to stand in the back. And then if you think it's both the above, stand on that side. So as you think about it, please move yourself. How hot is it? Let's say a hot summer day.
Nick spent at least 2 weeks planning this unit. He spent at least 3 days working over this lesson plan. And his 7th day of student teaching in phase 1 clinical practice, his 7th day, he was able to at least think about the possibility of asking students to think through what might be their answer choices in advance, and then attempt to identify what he thought was a critical misconception in the lesson that he wanted to know about, and that was bin B. Actually, bin C in this case. 7th day. He's got a long ways to go. It's stilted, it's slow, it's a little bit like this, but he's making progress. Sarah, in her phase 2 student teaching, that means she's now taught 2 semesters total in her life as a student teacher, 1 period a day.
How many scoops of ice cream did you have? 3. How about you, Martine? 1. 3 to 1, 2? 1. 1. Okay. So here we have a ratio. Actually, Van told me it was a ratio that expresses a comparison between these 2 quantities of ice cream scoops, okay? All right. So we're going to do a little brainstorm before we establish what a ratio really is, okay? So when I write the word ratio on the board, okay, I want to ask you guys, I want some help defining it. What do you think of when you hear the word ratio? Compare. What do you think, Kyle? What do you think of when you hear the word ratio? Anything that comes to mind?
Compared to something else, like how much there is.
How much there is. Okay. How much there is.
Pattern.
I heard a pattern. Is that, yeah, pattern. Thank you. Okay. Anybody else got any ideas?
Repetition.
Repetitions. Did you have an idea, Luis? No? Nothing comes to mind when you think of ratio? Not even scoops of ice cream now?
A rate.
What?
A rate.
A rate. Yeah. And how about what are we comparing?
2 or more numbers.
2 or more numbers. That's good. Two or more numbers. Excellent. Any other ideas? Are ice cream scoops in terms of numbers?
Yeah.
We can write them in terms of numbers, right? Or we can just say ice cream scoops, and maybe just say two or more things. We could say numbers or things. Okay, well all these are really good ideas. Any other ideas that people want to throw out there? Okay, so far we have a ratio. It seems to tell how much there is, right? By making a comparison of 2 or more numbers or things. Okay, so let's go ahead and write a definition.
I'm going to put you through the experience of 3.5 minutes of real teaching to try to set up a lesson about ratio with a quick check for prior knowledge before she goes into a formal definition, and then we'll do, I'm sure, pair shares and group activities. But the point is, formative assessment in action is really about these micro moments, these episodes. And it's really about figuring out how to break down your practice in a way that you can begin to elicit and bring them forward. So, to sum up quickly, the uncommon denominator and the common core is that it's now about, and I'm taking the policymaker seriously, speaking, listening, and communicating in California classrooms. That's very exciting. For our work, it's going to be more clinical experiences that bring about a focus on this kind of engagement with students. And I think, of course, the next step will be, no one said this here today, smarter balanced assessment. We will look for a linkage towards the new system quite soon. But for now, we're still working on just figuring out what we're doing in the classrooms. CSUs can make a huge difference, I believe. I believe we have the opportunity as well as the expertise to start to leverage the habits of reflective clinical practice. And I'm here to say on behalf of San Jose State, and I hope many other CSUs, that we really are ready for a new formative assessment-driven policy frame. And we appreciate PACE giving us the opportunity to share this. Thanks.